The second image starts by the end of the previous image, where we had the star of chaos. The star of chaos is here, the light at the top of this picture. From this star of chaos, or from this light, from this mass of light in the top of this image, there springs the worlds of divine providence, but also 4 arcs. These 4 arcs are the 4 elements, and also the 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, which gives 10, the completion of the work of divine providence. From the center of this light springs downward a column of light. This is the quintessence, the magical equilibrium formed between the 4 elements. This is what the Western tradition calls the Akasha. It has all the divine attributes, or it nurtures us with all the divine attributes, because this quintessence is a balance of all limited aspects in a way that they become unlimited. The central column sheds light over an altar. This altar has the ceremonial weapons or tools. It is floating, and the tools are also floating. It has 2 candles. One represents the plus pole and the other the minus pole, the electric fluid and the magnetic fluid. Below it, there is a sunset or sunrise. And then on the floor, a feather with its shadow and a sand clock. We are to start by the sand clock. As we are used to perceive reality, we see things according to a certain point in time, or a limited point in time. And if we are lucky, we see things, and if we are developed, we see things in the light of the eternal now. The challenge here is that we start perceiving the objects of our attention not only in the time we are, or in our own past, or whatever is the attribution in time we give to the objects of perception, but we start to perceive all the objects throughout the whole of time. So object X is this object in all its variations in time, in all its possibilities. This applies to everything we can perceive. And if we start to analyze the world in such terms, we will find that the element that is able to guide us through this labyrinth in time is, for once, intuition and truth. So what can stabilize an object in time is the truth this object represents, for this truth is eternal and changeless. Thus, we start to perceive the world in terms of truth, start to perceive the truth of the world. This is the feather of Maat that we find in the ground. This feather casts a long dark shadow. We call it, in Mahathian aromatics, the black flame. The black flame can be perceived as a sort of void or a vacancy of mind. It is a flame that swallows all limited aspects of existence and of ourselves. The sunset or sunrise is the sun of the two horizons, as the Egyptians called it. This is the sun that is half in our waking world and half in our dreaming or sleeping world. So it is half in our world and half in the nether. It is the sun that shines in the visible world and in the invisible world. It represents that the consciousness and awareness of the adept is now awaken in both worlds by virtue of what we have spoken of before, by virtue of the sand clock and then of the feather and the black flame. So the altar and the ceremonial weapons represent the faculties of the adept. They are afloat. The altar usually represents the earth world, the world in which we live. But we can see that it is floating, so it is not bound to limitations and to limitations of perception. The chalice is afloat. It's floating in the air, and even the wine it contains is floating above the chalice. This means that our love is not bound to conditions, it is unconditional. It is all-permeating, all-penetrating. The same happens with the Pentacle. And with the wand, and with the sword, and with the incense. The wand is our will, but our will here is independent of its result. Our will must be sufficient in itself. It attains because it is able to feed itself. It is a will towards something, but it does not depend on this something. The atom or sword is here the intellect, and it is the mind that exists in and of itself. It needs not the material plane. The pentacle that is afloat represents our consciousness, and it is a self-aware consciousness. To exist, it does not need the body. Of course, it permeates the whole body, but it does not need the body. The body of this consciousness is awareness, thus it is floating. The incense represents the capacity for materialization and dematerialization, and it is the crucible in which the elements are transformed at will. This is only possible by the independence of the spirit. Again, I have given some symbolic teachings and representations, but they are to be practiced in our daily life. How? By applying what these symbols represent. When we will, we must be confident in our will. We must not doubt and give too much credit to the so-called lust of result. Our presence is present in its own presence. It needs not what is around it. Our love makes no difference between outer things and inner things, between ourselves and the other, or the objects. Our mind is quintessential. It perceives mind in all objects around us and is constantly acknowledging itself.